In this video, we're going to examine the details of constructing a quiz in WeBWorK. There are several complications to understand, but the first thing to understand is that a quiz is actually not all that different from a regular WeBWorK homework set. I've constructed a homework set called function notation. We can see that it has 5 questions in it, and my intention is that these 5 questions will become a quiz. So we assume that you already understand how to construct a homework set using WeBWorK's problem library or by importing an existing homework set. To turn this homework set into a quiz, visit the Instructor Tools menu, scroll on the right until you find the set that you intend to turn into a quiz and select it, and then click to edit that set. This takes us to the set details page for that homework set. And at the bottom of this table, we can change the assignment type from homework to gateway quiz. After I make that selection and click to save changes, I have 9 more options available for configuring how I deliver this quiz to my students. There are many complications with how you administer your quiz. The intention is to give you a lot of flexibility. One thing to understand is that if you choose to do so, you can offer your students multiple versions of the same quiz. For example, they might take the quiz, earn a 70% and be dissatisfied with that. You might wish to offer them the ability to take a second version of the quiz where all the numbers are re-randomized. Another thing that you can optionally choose to enable is to allow your students to submit multiple times on the same version of the quiz. So they might be able to see on their first submission they only got 50% of the questions correct, and you would be potentially allowing them to change some of their answers and resubmit. And this does not count as a second version of the quiz. So let's discuss all 9 of these options. The first is the test time limit. I can decide that I only want my students to have, let's say, 30 minutes to take this quiz. If that's my choice, I'll fill in 30 here. If I leave this field as the number 0, I'm saying I don't really have a time limit, and the students have up until the close date to keep working on their quiz. The next option is whether or not I'd like to cap the test time at the set's close date. This is for the situation when the close date is, let's say, midnight, and the student begins their quiz at 11:55. Do you want them to be cut off at midnight, or do you want them to have the full 30 minutes? Then we have the number of graded submissions per test. If I leave this as 0, a student would be allowed to resubmit and resubmit and resubmit as many times as they want on the same version of the test. With each submission, they would see their score. If you set this to 1, that's perhaps a more traditional quiz where there's only one opportunity to get a question right or wrong. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to change the number of graded submissions to 2. That is, I'll be able to turn in my answers, see that I only got 70% of them correct, and then change some answers and resubmit. The next 2 fields have to be explained together: time interval for new test versions and the number of tests per time interval. Suppose that in a 24-hour period, you want your students to be able to retake the exam with a new version at most twice. Since there are 1,440 minutes in a day, and I said that I would like to allow my students to retake the exam 1 additional time for a total of 2 times, then I'll set these numbers to be 1440 and 2. So what that means effectively is that a student could take a version of the quiz in the morning, they run out of their 30 minutes, and then spend some time studying, and in the afternoon they get to take version 2. They can't take version 3 in the evening because they've already used up their 2 times within a 24-hour period. But if they wait until the next morning, then they can take a 3rd version. Now, if you're using this feature, you may want to make this number actually shorter than 24 hours. You'd like them perhaps to take the first version at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, the second version in the afternoon, and maybe the 3rd version at a little earlier, let's say 9 o'clock. So effectively, if you would like a 24-hour period, you could use something like 1,000 minutes. When questions are presented to the students, would you like them to be ordered randomly, yes or no? And then we have a field here for how many problems will be displayed per page. Ideally, I would recommend that you leave this as 0 and show all of the questions to the student at the same time. This is because at the bottom of the quiz page, there's a button for submitting answers. That button is for submitting all answers for the entire quiz. And if a student only sees a subset of the questions on the page, they may incorrectly presume that the button is only going to submit the questions that are on the page they currently are on. This shouldn't be a problem as long as your quizzes don't have too many questions in them. Then we have 2 fields at the bottom for what level of information you'd like to give your students in between their attempts. Would you like them to be able to see which questions they got right or wrong in between attempts? So if they've used up all their time or they've used up all their submissions on a particular version of the quiz, do you want them to see the scores? And you have some options here. You could only give them that data after the set's answer date becomes available. You could only give them that data in the form of totals, total score on the quiz instead of question by question score. And then this last option is for whether or not they actually see the questions on previous versions. You may not want to let them see the question that was asked for question 2 on version 1 while they're taking version 2 of the exam. Lastly, you may want to alter the set description for the set. When all these settings are set to your liking, then you can click to save changes. So now I'm going to log out and log in again as a student so you see what it's like to take the quiz. Okay, now I'm logged in as a student. There are a lot of homework sets that haven't technically opened yet. If I scroll to the bottom, that's where a student sees their quizzes. And I have the option to take the function notation test, quote, quote. Okay, I'll click to start that quiz. And this creates a version of the quiz just for me. I can see all 5 questions. Scrolling down, we see all 5 questions. At the bottom, I have a button to grade the test, and it's important for you and your students to understand that clicking this button is like turning in your test to the teacher. Even if only some of the questions are shown on screen, clicking this button will turn in all of the questions to be graded. Scrolling back to the top, I'll enter some answers. I could click this button over on the right to preview answers. It's not really appropriate for this question here, or not really helpful. That's for letting me see if I've typed quantity x plus 1 over x correctly in those situations. It'll pretty print my answer. If I scroll down to the bottom and I click to grade test, my score was recorded. I got a 1 out of 5 on the entire exam, and I have 1 attempt remaining. If you'll recall, when we were the instructor, we allowed students to have 2 attempts on this exam. Now I can see, since the settings were set to be such, that question 1 is the one that I got correct. I see all the green there. And so I can refine my answers to the rest of the quiz. Now I'll use a second attempt. I'm told that I got a 2 out of 5. I only used 2 minutes out of my 30 total minutes. And this test, which was version number 1, may no longer be submitted for a grade. I've used up all of my attempts. I am still allowed to check answers. I am allowed to type in more answers into the questions I got wrong and click the check test button, but at this point I will no longer receive credit. Also, because the instructor set things to be such, I can see correct answers and solutions now by checking these boxes. Those were configurable things when we were the instructor setting this quiz up. Okay, let's revisit the homepage for the course. If I scroll down to the bottom, I see a couple of things now. I could click to take the test again, or I could click here to actually see what happened on my first version of the test. You can see a note off to the side that I have completed that version. You can see that my score here was 2 out of 5. If I wanted to print a hard copy, I could do that. What I'm going to do now is take advantage of the instructor offering me a second version to take the quiz again. This time, the 5 questions are different. The numbers, the details are different. So I'll click to grade test. I got a 3.67 out of 5. Looks like I got a couple of questions wrong. And click to grade the test. And this time I received 5 out of 5. Let's go back and visit the course's homepage. Scrolling down, I now see I have this quiz, my own personal version test 1, and my own personal version test 2. I received a 2 out of 5 and then a 5 out of 5. Okay, now let's go revisit everything from the instructor's perspective. What does this look like from the scoring tools menu? If I enter scoring tools and scroll to the function notation problem set, this student here, the only thing I see for that student is their highest score from all the attempts that they used on the quiz. I see the 5 out of 5. There's no record here, at least, of the 2 out of 5. Okay, back to the quiz options. In the instructor tools menu, choose the function notation quiz, and let me edit the details for that quiz. Instead of making this a gateway quiz, I could have made it a proctored gateway quiz. If I make that selection and save it, then there's one additional field beyond the fields for the regular gateway quiz. This is a password for a proctor to enter while administering a quiz. You would use this feature if you're administering the quiz in a computer classroom and you really don't want students to have access to the quiz until everybody starts at the exact same time. The password could be, well, let's just say password. And while the students are assembling at their desks, You wait until the appropriate time and you tell the class, everyone, the password is password. And they'll be prompted to enter this password before they can actually begin their quiz. That concludes this video on administering a WeBWorK quiz. Administering a quiz is complicated due to all of the options that are made available to you, and I encourage you to ask your colleagues questions who have more experience with administering quizzes.